Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Claudia, and I'm the Content Marketing Manager here at Proformex. Before we kick things off, I just want to review a couple housekeeping items with everybody to help the presentation go as smoothly as possible. First, you'll notice that your audio was automatically muted when you logged in today. So if you could keep your audio muted and your videos turned off, that helps with bandwidth and limiting distractions during the presentation. So we would really appreciate that. But if you do have questions, feel free to use the chat box below. And if time allows at the end of today's session, we'll have our panelists address any questions that you might have. Secondly, I'll be putting a link to a survey into that chat box I just mentioned to collect your feedback about today's session. Your feedback is really important to us because it helps us continue to make relevant and valuable content for you. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce the moderator for today's panel, our very own CMO, David Morris.
Thank you, Claudia, and thank you to everyone who is taking the time to join us today. Reg BI has been just a really hot topic in our industry, and especially now since the implementation date of June 30 has officially passed. So we at Proformex wanted to bring this group together today to have a discussion around Reg BI because, quite frankly, there just still seems to be a bit of uncertainty and confusion around it. Our panelists all have unique perspectives across their different backgrounds, and I think they'll have relevant insights to share that will help everyone in the life insurance ecosystem, from producers, distributors, advisors, carriers alike, to gain a better understanding of what the Reg BI rollout entails. So before we get into it, I'd like to introduce you all to each of our expert panelists. So first up, we have my friend John Mendelsohn, co-founder and CEO of Ashar Group Life Settlements and Policy Valuations. Ashar Group serves insurance professionals and fiduciaries as an independent advanced planning resource for life settlements, policy valuation, and longevity solutions. Since launching Ashar Group back in 2003, John has been an influential member of the industry, serving as an advocate for best practices and transparency. Mr. Mendelsohn, welcome to the panel today.
Thanks, David. I'm happy to be here.
All right. Next, we have Trey Reynolds, Executive Vice President of Strategy and New Business Development at MIB Group. Trey, as many of you know, has held a number of different positions at companies that are well known in the life insurance industry. He has served as Head of Life Insurance Distribution at Equitable, National Sales Vice President at John Hancock, Executive Vice President at Crump, and President of Bramco Financial Services. And just this year, Trey joined MIB Group to lead MIB's strategy and new business development teams focusing on innovation, partnerships, and bringing to market new value-added products and services. Trey, thanks for joining us.
Thank you, David. My pleasure. Happy to join.
Great. All right. I'm very excited to welcome Christie Corado today. Christie is Senior Vice President and Deputy General Counsel of Truist Insurance Holdings, which is the 5th largest broker in the U.S., and also serves as General Counsel to Crump Life Insurance Services. Christie has extensive insurance industry advocacy experience, including leadership roles on the legislative and regulatory committees of the Council of Insurance Agents and Brokers, the Wholesale Specialty Insurance Association, and serves on the board of AALU and GAMA. She's also a recognized speaker on emerging regulatory issues and within the insurance industry. Christie, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks, David.
And last but not certainly not least, I'd like to welcome Brad Campbell. Brad serves as partner at, I'm going to get this right, Faegre Drinker.
Hey, well done.
Thank you. And is nationally recognized figure in employer-sponsored retirement plans. He counsels his clients in ERISA Title I issues, ERISA Title I issues and litigation, including fiduciary conduct and prohibited transactions. Welcome, Brad.
Thanks. All that means I'm fun at parties, by the way.
Great. So as you can tell by those introductions, our panel has a wealth of knowledge, and I'm completely looking forward to getting the most out of them here. And I'm David Morris, Chief Marketing Officer at Proformex. We're an enforced policy management platform for agents, advisors, carriers, distributors, fiduciaries, and trustees. So you guys ready to get going? All right, let's do it. So the first question I have, let's direct this to start with Christie and Brad. Why was it important for our industry to formalize client best interest standards through Reg BI? And how's Reg BI different than previous codes of standard like suitability? Christie?
Sure, I'll kick it off. Well, I'll start with the SEC, what they actually stated. So they said that regardless of whether a retail investor chooses a broker-dealer or a registered investment advisor or both, the retail investor should be entitled to a recommendation or advice that is in his or her best interest and that does not place interests of the firm or the financial professional ahead of the interests of the retail investor. So what this Reg BI did was harmonize the standards of conduct between registered investment advisors and broker-dealers. Prior to this, there was a suitability standard, which we're all familiar with, promulgated through FINRA. And it might be valuable to highlight the difference between suitability and the fiduciary or best interest standard. So on the FINRA suitability standard, generally it requires that a security transaction be suitable for a client's needs. And quite simply, some of those factors that you might evaluate would be the client's risk tolerance, net worth, etc. But on the best interest side, it's this concept of placing the client's interests ahead of your own. And some refer to it as the combination of like a duty of care combined with the duty of loyalty. So what a lot of you in the audience might be saying is that I already do this. And that is really, really a good fact because now it's mandated. And as of 6/30, FINRA will be enforcing it during their periodic reviews. So we thought it might be helpful to level set at the start of this webinar the various best interest regulations that are out there, because we're going to hone in on SEC Reg BI and Form CRS. But Crump Life has graciously provided their best interest regulation status report. And I thought that although again, we're focused on Reg BI through the SEC, and that predominantly includes securities, including variable life and variable annuity products. It's worth noting that non-variable insurance products are typically not subject to Reg BI, but may be subject to other state standards of conduct. So if you look at the chart, I'm going to skip over the Department of Labor right now, but move over to the National Association of Insurance Commissioners. So for a couple of years, the NAIC was debating this annuity suitability, annuity transaction model reg, which finally came into adoption earlier this year in February. And basically that has taken the suitability standard that existed for annuities and taken it up to a best interest standard. And that currently has only been adopted in Arizona and Iowa. But, you know, stay tuned. Many more states have it in their legislators for approval. So, you know, any kind of fixed annuity recommendation also has this elevated standard of care. The next one on the second page is the New York Department of Financial Services. And that was wild ride. That final regulation and applies to both life insurance and annuities on the fixed side. So if you're in New York, you have a best interest standard for both life and insurance and annuities. And then we have the Massachusetts and Nevada securities divisions that wanted to come out with their own regs for a fiduciary standard on securities recommendations. So they compete a little bit with the SEC Reg BI now as well. But why we're highlighting this to you is that, you know, it's very possible that in the state of Massachusetts and Nevada, if you're in the, you know, a broker dealer or an agent that is registered to sell securities, you're going to have the state responsibility to know what's going on and what you have to disclose and do for this duty of care and loyalty. And then you're also going to be looking to your broker dealer for their SEC BI compliance obligations. Similar in New York, if you're selling a variable life product, by way of example, you have New York DFS responsibilities for best interest, And then you would also be governed by the SEC Reg BI and Form CRS from your BD because it's a variable product. So I know that sounds like a lot and it sounds confusing, but what we're here today is to share with you some of the practical applications and to tell you that the first place to go to get all this figured out, if you haven't done it already, is to your broker-dealer. So your broker-dealer will be providing your own written supervisory procedures, your own training, your own Form CRS, and disclosure documents. So if you don't have that information, that's where I would head after this call. What we're providing here is more generic guidance on the rule and how it applies, and some of the things you need to be concerned about. So I'm going to flip it over to Brad. I didn't talk about the fiduciary role under DOL, which just came out yesterday in the Federal Register and is in its comment period. But I thought that Brad might touch on that for us.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think what that chart illustrates nicely is the fact that there are different silos of regulation, but they can all come together on the same transaction. And that's highlighted by DOL's new proposal, which not only has two parts. One part is a new class exemption, and what that is special rules that let people who are acting as ERISA fiduciaries, in other words, making recommendations to either ERISA plan, retirement plan fiduciaries like 401k plans, to those plan participants, or who are involved in rollovers from those various plans. It allows them to get paid. So this exemption allows commissions and other forms of compensation if you meet certain conditions. And what DOL did in the proposal that just came out is to align those conditions that would be the ERISA requirements with new regulation best interest. So the concept is that this is a deregulatory action. Even though it's a new rule, what it's trying to do is say DOL and SEC would have similar requirements so that you'd be able to have a more, basically if you have one good robust system, it ought to comply substantially for both types of regulation. And I think that's one of the key messages that chart shows is that across the board, what we're seeing is regardless of the particular flavor of the definition of best interest, the common denominator is all of these require you to better document and better show your work and better consider all of the relevant factors to making a recommendation. We're seeing that in the New York 187 rule. We're seeing that in regulation best interest. We're seeing that with DOL. The other part of the DOL proposal that just came out is a new interpretation of when you have to worry about ERISA. When do those rules apply? And where we've been the last year or two is that generally speaking, if you were talking to a retirement plan participant and you said, hey, roll over your 401k into an IRA and I'll advise you on it, that would be probably not subject to ERISA fiduciary obligations. It's very much the subject of Reg BI. And that's one of the things I would urge you to talk to your broker-dealer about in particular is when I'm helping someone with a rollover, what are all the steps I need to take under Reg BI? Because that's something Chair Clayton emphasized as one of his top sort of enforcement priorities just a few weeks ago, is making sure people are getting good advice in connection with those rollovers. But what DOL did yesterday is actually expand the ERISA footprint to make it more likely that if you recommend a rollover and there's an ongoing relationship that that participant's going to have with you, so you're starting an ongoing relationship by recommending the rollover, that means ERISA will also apply. So you could have Reg BI and ERISA and a state insurance standard potentially apply simultaneously to the same transaction. So again, not trying to scare you, but trying to point out that these rules are coming together and we have to be cognizant of where they all mix. And fortunately, DOL and SEC are trying to make the standards similar enough that we have a reduced compliance burden.
Got it. So what is the new client relationship summary, Form CRS? Brad, maybe because this ties right into that, I think. How will it help meet the new Reg BI regulations? Who gets it? When do they need to get it? That kind of information.
Yeah, absolutely. The first thing you have to remember about Form CRS and regulation best interest is that they are two separate regulatory requirements from the SEC. So you have to comply with both, and compliance with one doesn't earn you compliance with the other. So Form CRS is a summary, a plain language summary of your relationship with the client that has to be provided in particular formats. In plain language, it can't be more than a certain number of pages long, depending on which type of entity you are. It's required of broker-dealers and registered investment advisors to be provided to retail customers. And retail customers are natural persons or they're non-financial professional representatives. So in other words, if you're advising a foundation, Form CRS, Reg BI don't apply, but if you're advising individuals, then it does. So retail customer is the target audience. As Christie said, this rule went into effect on June 30th, so you should have, your organization should have already been providing these, the Form CRS disclosure to your existing clients. You have an obligation to provide it to your new and prospective clients before you make a recommendation, before you sign a contract. So those are the kinds of, so if you're having a discussion with a prospective client, and you're telling them that they ought to come to you for a brokerage, a brokerage account, for example, you need to provide the Form CRS, before that goes much further. You can do that electronically. You can do that in hard copy. The normal SEC rules for providing documents electronically would apply. There are also times when you have to update the Form CRS if a material fact changes, in which case you have 60 days to make changes to your existing clients. And lastly, if you have an existing client, but you're essentially selling them a new service, you're recommending they change their account, you're recommending they do a rollover, you're recommending a new service that wasn't part of what you were providing before, you would have to again provide the Form CRS. So it's basically a disclosure document that lays out what services I'm providing, in what capacity I'm providing them, my fees, my expenses, my conflicts of interest, and it has a very stylized form that has to be followed that the SEC has laid down. Note that that's separate from the disclosures Reg BI requires before you make a recommendation of a particular security or investment strategy. They may be similar, they may overlap in some respects, but they are separate. So you have to provide the Form CRS at the outset of a relationship. You have to provide the Reg BI disclosure each time you make a recommendation.
Got it. Interesting. So since the start of our conversation 20 minutes ago, 15 minutes ago, I'm hearing a theme of documentation. If I'm hearing that.
That is the new reality. We are, regardless of any of these standards, one of the common elements is show your work, document why you made the recommendation, show that you considered the relevant factors. And in particular, in Reg BI, there is a specific emphasis on fees and costs. You need to specifically analyze the fees and costs that are going to be incurred by your retail customer. Doesn't mean you have to pick the cheapest. That is not a mandate, but you do have to consider them and document why it was in their best interest to do what you recommended they do.
Got it. All right, well, let's move on to what, basically right now, what new or revolving opportunities the life insurance practitioners have with Reg BI now in effect. Trey, you want to start us off on that?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, David. And thanks to Christie and Brad. It's just, these things, of course, can get so complicated and confusing. And it's nice to have people that support our business that can help us put it into plain language and better understand how we apply it in our practices. And from my perspective, as Christie mentioned early on, the good news is that by and large, every producer, most producers, and agents are already performing in the best interests of their clients. So from a behavioral change perspective, as those of us that are doing the right things by our clients certainly won't have to change our own behaviors and actions as it relates to how we engage with our clients. So the real impact, as we've worked so hard in this industry to try and scale back the amount of paperwork, the amount of disclosures, to try and create a better experience for our clients, this clearly is going in the other direction as it relates to completing more forms, and doing it in a way that certainly would add a little bit more work. But ultimately, because the regulation's in place, how do we use this to help forward what we're trying to do, which of course is the idea of increasing overall insurance sales to our clients. And I would say that while we're talking about an SEC standard that falls underneath the broker-dealer that applies to variable business specifically, you've heard that the direction and the momentum is clearly to all business. And Reg 187, of course, addresses that in the form of fixed products, where there's training and other things that we go through to make sure that we're informed, that we know what products that we're selling, we stay informed, and are able to make sure that we provide the best and most suitable products. From an agent or producer perspective, the opportunity is to make sure that our clients know that we are putting them before our own interests in business. As we think about our disclosures when it comes to conflicts, it gives us an opportunity to demonstrate to them that we're in effect working to protect them, their businesses, their families. Clearly, those that have to create disclosures where they've not behaved properly in our business are going to struggle to compete with those that have behaved properly and don't have those types of disclosures that they have to provide to their overall clients. The idea that we're going to do what's suitable at a point of sale perspective should give our clients a lot of satisfaction that we've got not only the traditional career product manufacturers, the career carriers, but also those that use either independent in nature and use other sources. There's lots of avenues to determine suitability. It's very clear that suitability is not based on price. And thank goodness for all of us that we're not trying to pick out one element of a product structure to determine suitability. We've all experienced the commoditization of our business, and yet this is much broader than that as it relates to determining suitability. So, again, almost everyone, I'm certain, has been operating in a best interest environment anyway, putting our clients first always, and it's an opportunity for us to continue to leverage the information, re-engage, and show them how committed we are to the profession, making sure we elevate the profession to a point where our clients are always put first.
Yep. John, why don't you jump in on that? Because I know how important, taking care of your clients and the transparency in the industry is to you and the folks over at Ashar.
Sure, and I'll speak to this not just as it relates to life settlements and policy valuations, but generally from an overview, we understand the logic behind Reg BI, and there's so many professionals that are always acting in the client's best interest, and they have processes like that. But when we're looking at the totality of the market, this can really give an opportunity for all of the different BGA, BD, RIA, banking channels to really elevate the insurance profession as it is, because we do see this convergence happening pretty significantly around the market about how do you design the proper platform to measure, monitor, report back to clients in a way that they can understand what tools are available to the different professionals that you work with, that you collaborate with, and what type of deliverable are you providing back to that client that they can really discuss and make the best decision that they have. So this really will end up being a terrific opportunity and advantage for certain insurance-centric types of professionals as well as organizations that do offer this type of recommendation, because it gives them the ability to differentiate and provide more of a customized story and really show that they're looking out for their client's best interests as they go through that. A specific area that will really help them out is within their policy review process, and how that might relate to other areas that are affected by life insurance, and how are they uncovering these types of issues? How are they proactively managing them? So I really feel like this is a great step in the direction that will continue to elevate the profession, and most importantly, help to attract and recruit even new professionals that really want to get deeply involved in the insurance business. And this gives them another comfort level to become more serious about that in their practice.
That's great. Trey, here, I got one for you here. How are carriers feeling the impact of Reg BI?
Yeah, that's the great question, because ultimately the carriers, I'd say in a couple of different areas. Number one, most carriers, of course, own a broker-dealer, and those reps flow up to, particularly the career agencies, those reps flow up to that broker-dealer. So all the work, as Christie and Brad described, have all taken place at the broker-dealer to understand how those reps comply with those rules. And quite frankly, the supervision responsibilities under BD extend way beyond just the FINRA type of regulation and supervision. So they're also incorporating the 187, and they're incorporating some of the future of what DOL may bring to us. Many of them are registered investment advisors that fall in the fiduciary market specifically, which is of course different from best interest even. So very complex and can be very time consuming and costly. But from my perspective, that's the role of the broker dealer, always has been. It's been primarily a vehicle where those of us that are in the business can engage with the broker dealer, knowing that we're going to have the right compliance items in place, so that as we're interacting and engaging with our customers, with our friends, our families, that we're going to be protected and we're going to be protecting them as we engage in an overall sale. What's fascinating to me, and point number two is that, of course, we've seen so many people leave on the life insurance side, where my experience is, leave their variable licenses behind, moving away from a FINRA structure in hopes to move away from the costs and liability that comes with trying to build a practice with all of these new regs. It's very costly for, of course, many of the producers and agents to try and maintain licenses, do all the compliance, engage with broker dealers, the haircuts that come off of some of the commission schedules and everything else. But the point is that this is a path that's going to continue to proceed, and we're going to have to find a way to be more cost effective so we don't continue to lose people. So if you're electing to leave broker dealer and you're going to fall under an NAIC regulation, you're still going to have to be compliant. And I would also suggest that the trends that we're seeing as an industry, companies trying to find out how to price product competitively and yet still maintain profit, has a lot of shifts back to the variable market. So naturally, as you see products shift and move back towards variable, we're all back underneath the FINRA and SEC guidelines once again, and we have to be prepared to work with some of these areas. Now, the carriers are committed to increasing the number of agents, producers doing business with them. They're committed to the proper training, the support and disclosures. They're committed to the technology to make it easy, and they're certainly committed ultimately to providing the best experience for a customer. So all of those things will play in as they try to integrate some of these components to protect everyone along the way. But no one's suggesting that we stop the growth in the life insurance business. So there will be all sorts of opportunities to streamline and make sure that it works for everyone.
Great. I don't know if Christie or John or Brett, anybody else want to jump in on that? Have any comments on how carriers or broker dealers are feeling the impact?
Sure. I can hop in on that for a second. We work across different practice areas, and the common theme that we're seeing in 2020 with COVID, people having to force themselves to kind of learn new ways to train, develop more competency within their organizations is really an area of focus. They're trying to find ways to take their overall client engagement process with all of these new requirements and overlay them into a path that really meets all these different standards. And I believe that in 2020 and beyond, we're going to see more training in ways that hopefully will help once again elevate this profession, so it can continue to meet these different types of standards, because it's the goal to comply with at a minimum all of the different requirements that we have when we look towards doing this type of training with the client. But the reality is there's an intersection between Reg BI and CFP and all these other types of factors that are influencing each other, and there's a need to consider to be consistent among all of these, that you're doing the right thing and you're providing information in a way that's consumable for the client and their advisory team. So I really see that happening significantly among our carrier, BGA, BD type relationships.
Great. Brad, I'm going to shoot this one over to you and probably let everybody jump in on this as well. How does Reg BI affect recommendations for in-force business?
Yeah, so obviously we get into some interesting questions there where you have what's the scope of the jurisdiction of Reg BI. So generically speaking, if you're looking at insurance products, the variable ones are considered securities and therefore are clearly within the scope. Fixed products typically are not within the scope directly. So that's kind of one of the issues there. And there's several different ways that can play out. It also, of course, depends on the nature of what kind of what's the nature of a particular recommendation with respect to that in-force. Is it exercising a particular right? Is it actually an investment decision under a right under the contract versus an investment decision? and that also is influenced by what state you're in. So there is, there are a number of moving parts there that I think are presenting some compliance challenges going forward, kind of across the industry. But those are things people, I think, are trying to get a handle on and work out.
And just to add on to that a second, and something John said earlier, with regard to policy valuations and policy review and in-force business, if you do commit to an ongoing monitoring of the products you sold, it's important to note, again, documentation, but even a hold strategy upon an evaluation requires a writing. So it's not, once and done. There's ongoing monitoring, and at each time you monitor, if you're making a recommendation to hold or sell or whatever, that then triggers this obligation again. So I think in our business, in the insurance business, there's different producers with different business models, but taking this bar up to this next level for your annual meetings with your clients or more regularly, you're just going to have to realize it's not just at the inception of the sale. It's all the way through the relationship. So I think that's just one other little factor I wanted to highlight.
Yeah, it makes total sense. John or Trey, did you want to jump in on that?
Yeah, I think Christie and Brad did a great job of describing. I think, over the years, of course, we've always viewed the renewals as a way to support ongoing support in the policy service area. We know that renewals have come down and have been heaped in the commission, but that doesn't absolve the responsibility to act in the best interest of the clients every time we engage. So I've always viewed, part of our role in the industry, and whether that's, of course, at the agent level or ultimately carriers taking on some responsibility, there are clients, they expect us to be there when they need us. They expect us to be there in the event of a claim. That, to me, is in the best interest of our clients, and certainly something that we all need to look at in our practices to make sure we're serving them the best way possible.
Great.
And David, I've always heard some of the top professionals we work with talk about when a policy is sold, their job is not done. It's really just begun. And the client is counting on them for that, having resources such as yours and others within the market, that really helps them keep their promises. And, all of us are probably customers, not just actively involved within this market, within the life insurance community. We have that put in place for ourselves as well to protect our business, our families, and things such as that. So this is a pretty personal decision for so many of the clients that we serve. They want to make sure that you're there for them down the road with questions. So I think that whole concept that I've heard some talk about, once a policy is sold, their job is not done, it has just begun, really can benefit from this type of Reg BI approach, services like yours and things like that.
Great. So Trey, I'll shoot this one to you, but let everybody else chime in on this as well. What are the biggest changes for all types of advisors these days?
Yeah, and we mentioned them throughout the call. And again, I think it's important to separate, the technical and legal part and the compliance part of the requirement with some of the items that we're talking about relative to just what we should be doing as an industry. But looking through it from my perspective, and Christie will chime right in, but it's really around disclosures and it's around, some of the compliance elements of it. There's a lot of work that we have to do as it relates to the forms, to the ongoing documentation, to demonstrate that we're falling within those guidelines specifically. So that, from my perspective, is the biggest. There are items around fees and disclosure around fees. I think from the perspective of selling variable life insurance as an example, that could be new to us. That, of course, was in the original DOL. I'd ask Christie and Brad maybe to comment on what that means from a compensation perspective. But yes, there are some meaningful things that we're going to have to sort through as we start to improve our ability to disclose and document.
Brad, you want to jump in?
Yeah, no, first of all, I want to echo your first comment, which was there's a difference between what's the minimum required legal standard for technical compliance and what is it you actually do to serve a client well, to provide what's truly in their best interest. And I think, one is, again, legal, technical, the other one's more aspirational. But really, if you're working for the aspirational one, you're probably doing all the things that are necessary to comply with the other. At least you're heading down that path. And I think probably the biggest transition for a lot of producers has been the fact that you're going to have to write down a lot more. You're going to have to show your work a lot more than in the past. A lot of the other technical stuff, in fact, your broker-dealer is taking care of for Reg BI. Things like adopting the policies and procedures, addressing any conflicts from compensation, making sure the right disclosures are prepared for you to be, for you to then send out when you're making those contacts. So, there's a lot of that technical stuff that falls on the broker-dealer, but I think the producer is really there on the front line of what's the right thing to be doing and then documenting that I did it.
Yeah.
Two other quickies. Advise, if you are not a registered investment advisor, you are not allowed to use the term advisor or 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 ER in your title or in your name of your company or your agency. So that is a significant change for some, and that needs to go away if it hasn't been done already. And then I think the other material issue that was highlighted early on, but I think we need to remind ourselves about it now, is the concept of sales contests. And the concept of participating in a sales contest where one specific product is compensated for a period certain at a higher rate to get more sales over another product. If you are recommending that product, you better be really well buttoned up on why that's in somebody's best interest. I think the majority of those sales contests have gone away. I do want to say that you still can participate in production-based goals that that affect that your sales filter into reaching certain targets that aren't product specific. That's still allowed by most broker dealers. Well, I shouldn't speak for most broker dealers. You'd have to check with your own broker dealer. But over the industry, it's this concept of putting one product over another from a comp perspective that would not, in my personal interpretation, meet the best interest standard. So, watch your name, no advisory names, all advisory. And if you are involved in some kind of a opportunity for additional compensation, make sure that it's not product specific.
Yeah, just to emphasize that advisor with an O or an E issue, one of the things the SEC said when they decided to go forward with Reg BI as scheduled on June 30th and not delay it due to all the COVID issues, they said, we think there's been a lot of progress made, it's going to work, it's really important, so we need to keep the deadline. They did say, we recognize, though, that there are some potential problems that have happened, so we will take into account good faith efforts to comply. But this is an example of the kind of thing that they're not going to be very forgiving about. That's actually very easy to check on, and the kind of thing that they're probably going to be doing literally this moment, now that enforcement has begun, is looking for those types of errors. So if you haven't on your social media, as well as your official title and your firm title on that, anywhere on your social media, have you still got that word advisor in there where it shouldn't be? That's the kind of thing that the SEC and FINRA are going to be focusing on for this first quarter, almost certainly.
Great.
And if I could just provide a real example of the sales contest, because I think it's very applicable to both BGAs and agents and producers. And in the past, you're able to create your own production value, and of course, there could be some outside production coming in. If you're most career companies are interpreting it as, look, we've got our own proprietary product. But if there's an outside selling arrangement, you can't favor one over the other for those productions. So it's aggregating that information to qualify, as Christie suggested, from a production base. So you're going to see, I agree with Christie, quite a bit of change as it relates to those of us that really relied on some of those sales contests in the past to help drive that loyalty into our firms. That's
great stuff. So anytime we do these roundtables or webinars or anything, we always want everybody that comes to make sure that they get something actionable that they can walk away with, right? So they at least when they invested their time, they might get at least one thing. And by the way, I think for the last 40 minutes, there's more than one thing that everybody has gotten or should have gotten. But if you could give, and this is a question to everybody, and we start with John, but if you could give one piece of advice to advisors about how to navigate Reg BI going forward, what would that recommendation be?
Well, after probably being like everyone else and reading what feels like 1,000 articles and different types of white papers on this, if Reg BI and things such as this tend to expand over time into other areas, not contract. And financial professionals really need to be careful and aware of the unintended consequences of not applying this same type of approach to other areas of their business and planning that they work on. I was having a discussion with Brad at one point prior to this call, and just talking about how, you know, life settlements, policy valuations, where does that fall into specifically? Is it covered, not covered? And, you know, I might, you know, kind of pass this ball over to Brad for a little bit, because the unintended consequences of something that may not be specific today, but is it in the best interest of the client? You know, Brad, maybe you can give a little bit of insight with your response as well, as it related to our question, our discussion we had prior to this presentation.
Well, when we were talking earlier, the example you gave me was the surrender value of a policy might be very small, but the options that are out there might actually be quite large, and that would generate a significant amount of money, a material amount of money in that advisory relationship. And therefore, is that something that the advisor should be considering? And the answer is, again, going back to this notion, there's a difference between what's technically required and what's appropriate for the situation. And because there are different regulatory structures, it depends on which capacity you're operating at the time you're looking at something, whether you're operating as a registered rep of a broker-dealer or an IAR of an RIA or an insurance producer on a purely state-regulated insurance issue. There might be slightly different answers to that technical question of, if this is relevant, must I look at it? That's different than, should I look at things that are relevant? And I really think the answer there, as you were saying, across the board, is we need to do what's in the best interest of our clients and take into account all of those relevant factors.
So there, along those lines, someone just asked a question, just to jump in here. They asked, like, how would you describe, how is a best interest versus fiduciary duty different?
That's actually a really good question, because the best interest standard in Reg BI and in many other places is essentially a reworded version of what is a common fiduciary standard. For example, in ERISA, its fiduciary standard, which is one of the highest sort of known to law. What I think is different ultimately is really the consequences of whether you're a fiduciary or a best interest standard. The process by which you make a decision, by which you assemble the information, figure out what to take into account, document it, and make a recommendation that's in the best interest, really is pretty similar in any of those. What I would say is a prudent fiduciary process for ERISA looks a lot like a best interest process for Reg BI. One of the big differences comes down to, well, what other things get brought into being a fiduciary, other legal consequences. For example, in ERISA, it brings in the prohibited transaction rules, which are hyper protective other people's money statute conflict issues that create problems that have to be addressed differently. That's got nothing to do with the quality of the recommendation. It has to do with the structure around how you get paid in making that recommendation. So these fiduciary standards can bring in some of these other legal aspects that complicate, so to speak, the relationship. They're not really about the duty of care, how you make a decision. They're more about the duty of loyalty. What's a conflict? Which conflicts can be mitigated? Which ones can be eliminated? And how do you deal with that?
Great. Christie, back to the original question on any piece of advice to give to advisors on how to navigate moving forward.
Yeah, first, make sure you're in tune with your broker-dealer. Like I said from the beginning, everything you need should be at the firm level for you to, but you have your own responsibility, so you need to implement it in your practice. But the key would be, we keep saying document, but it's really about transparency in your discussions, writing down contemporaneously after your meetings, and then retaining your records. So it's just, more discipline probably in the sales process for most insurance professionals. and to follow all the guidelines that your broker dealer provides you, which they've obviously spent a lot of time and effort putting forth for your benefit.
That's great. Trey, anything else you want to add on that?
No, embrace it. Sell more life insurance. You know, it's the law. It's the law, and we all have an opportunity to, find a way to put this to our advantage now with our clients, prospective clients, families, and friends. So, embrace it.
Yep. So, like I stated earlier, I think what's really interesting. There's a lot of stuff that that's, like you said, we've all read a ton of things about the best interest standards. I think it's probably a good thing overall for the industry, just because it just raises everybody's game and the professionalism across the board. And there are applications, whether it's us or somebody else, that has the ability to help you throughout this process to maintain, to document your communications, your recommendations, everything across the board. So a few things before we go. I know Claudia just put up the link to the survey. It is in the chat box. We would greatly appreciate your feedback on this, as it helps us to be better at what we do and bring more relevant content out to the ecosystem. I can't thank our panelists enough today for sharing their expertise and insight. Christie, Greg, Trey, John, thank you so much. I know I've had a great time. For a couple of you I know and past, it's been fantastic. Christie and Brad, who I've met recently, enlightening. I've learned more in our conversations in such a short time. I can't thank you enough for taking the time and participating and sharing your wisdom with everybody today. If there's any questions we didn't have a chance to cover today, you can reach out to me. There's a slide I think Claudia put up on the screen that has my information at Proformex and our website that you can reach out to, and I will make sure any questions you have, any information you need about today's roundtable discussion gets forwarded to you. Again, I just want to thank everybody for taking the time today. This was super helpful and informative. So until the next time, yep, you got it. Until the next time, we'll see you soon. Take care.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.